Great. So we're welcoming you to today, Midori the artist. I love that title, Midori, because it gives us lots of ways to play and explore both your creativity and our own. I'm really delighted that we're getting to hang out today with our patrons and that you and I are getting time together. We're both normally so busy working.
Yeah,
We haven't even got to hang out for a while.
yeah.
My name is Caroline Carrington. I'm a certified Neo Tantra educator, passionate about inviting people out of their heads and into their bodies through dynamic forms of meditation. I am honored to have my dear friend Midori here, talking about something I haven't introduced my patrons to this aspect of your work very much. And I always like to start with a bit of a personal story. Now, which one do I get to pick from? I think, let me think about this. The one that's coming to mind, so I'll go with that, is we were both teaching at a conference, and at the conference, you needed a demo for the conference. And you were demoing flogging for this particular class. And we did a negotiation, and Midori decided it would be a great idea to do the negotiation in front of the entire room. Um, and I was her delightful demo bottom. So it was really anxiety provoking for me to have to do this negotiation. And for those of you that haven't done Midori's Forte Femme, I highly recommend it. But in Forte Femme and in some of our other classes, you deconstruct many of the terms that a lot of us are used to using when we negotiate. So I was even more intimidated than I normally would have been. And Midori said in front of the class, if I ask you, how's that? How's it going? How are you feeling? That means I'm bored. So I was terrified that I was going to bore Midori. Thankfully, the demo went wonderfully well, and she didn't ask me any questions about how I was doing. So we ended up having a fun time, and I believe you gave a wonderful class. So that's my personal memory for today. Midori, both for your patrons and for those of mine who may be meeting you for the first time, please share a little bit more about yourself, knowing that you traverse many alternative landscapes in the world.
Yeah, I do a whole. Hey, I've never taken you on one of my museum visits, have I?
I have not had the pleasure yet, no.
Oh, see, that is a indeed unique experience because yeah, I will personal docent people uh, through a museum, and it's quite entertaining. Um, depending on depending on the exhibition, I can go into various art history trivia or just completely be silly asshole about things. There's a um, uh, ancient pottery from one of the earlier Korean dynasties in San Francisco Asian Art Museum, and it is a drinking vessel in the shape of a duck, and it looks like it has a mohawk and a cartoon grin on it. It's one of my favorite pieces, and I'll lead people to that and have them meet ancient punk rock duck. So yeah, it's a load of fun. And then there's like when I go through museums um, with a particular focus to finding the dirty stuff. And I do find it tragic that Instagram and many of social media, but particularly Instagram, will actually, their stupid bots will flag classic paintings as because boobies.
I believe they've changed that setting though, because I tested the theory out just yesterday,
Oh,
Midori, and I put up a picture of the top portion of a woman with naked breasts, and it was not flagged. It was a life drawing model. So I think for art, they are now letting that happen. I don't know about Instagram. This was on
Yeah,
Facebook.
yeah.
But yes, we're getting annihilated just for presenting the beauty and the.
So yeah, let's talk about my art. Um, yeah, I've got first of all, my art site. If you go to planetmidori.com and then click on art, you will get to that. And particularly, there's right now, go to place a button that's past, present, future. I'm about to redesign the site. So this is soon to be my art site classic. But if you go to past, present, future, you'll see some of my most recent work.
Wonderful. Well, we can make sure that people get all these links at the end as well so that they can stay nice and present with what. Oh, I love it, Mr. Greg. You being such a star. Thank you so much. We're getting all even the links for the duck drinking vessel at the Asian Art Museum are popping up. What
The
a
punk
star.
rock duck. Yeah,
So I know we're focusing on your art today, and there's an intersection, it seems, in a lot of your art between some of the worlds you dance in. So can you give people just an overview of how you like to play in the world, play and teach?
I am not understanding your question.
I want you to give your elevator pitch a little bit about who you are, because some of my audience may be
Oh,
meeting you for
okay.
the first time.
I have a double-sided career. Um, Artist on one side and sexuality on the education on the other side. They are two sides of the same coin, all centering around creative self-expression. Uh, in terms of the sexuality education, it is also about teaching people about how to uh, access the creative self-expression without getting caught up in tropes and stereotypes and engaging in self-sabotaging and self-limiting beliefs. So about creative living. So really I'm teaching about creative living on the teaching side, but it's on the two sides of the coin. The other side is my art, which is the creative expression of myself. So I have to have both of for me to have the best me experience of teaching, helping others for creative self-expression, but then my own creative self-expression. I must have a balance. If I'm doing too much on the teaching side and helping others, there's a my self-expression becomes anemic. If I'm focusing entirely on my artwork, I I'm not looking around. I become a bit of a navel gazing, if you will. So putting myself in a larger world. So I need the balance of both.
Great. And it also sounds like you hang out with a lot of other artists to network, and you have some pretty impressive art in your home as well.
Thank you. Collaboration is something that's really important to me, whether it's the social collaboration of having artist peers, which can be really difficult living in San Francisco and with the kind of hustle that I've had in terms of just being able to survive, to make the time to connect to other artists who are themselves also in a hustle. So oftentimes I felt like in a bit of isolation, and I try to connect with my creative friends as I travel, but um, oddly during COVID, so many of us have either weren't traveling, lost their job, or they were in lockdown or whatever, where I've actually been able to be more active with my creative colleagues, and many of them I also collaborate with. It's part of my social practice aspect of it.
And speaking of the pandemic, how have you been able to stay connected to your creative self during the pandemic? Because I know I've struggled with that just even in my own business, staying creative and having to reimagine the ways of doing many things. So how have you kept that alive for yourself?
And remember, I said two sides of the coin. All right, so there's a difference between entrepreneurial business creative in terms of creating curriculum, etc., versus my art side. Those are two different creativities.
Right.
Whereas on my artwork, actually during the pandemic, has been great. It has been absolutely great.
What's been great about it?
Um, Especially during the first 4 months, because I was alone. My wife was away taking care of her mother. So I was alone, which meant for the first time in my busy life, I got to be completely with every ebb and flow of my own emotion and to ride through the highs and the lows and to be in, it was like my own Walden Pond.
Mm.
And, otherwise I'm on the road. I'm teaching, I'm focusing on making things possible for other people. I didn't at that point have to worry about I couldn't worry about the being creative in my teaching aspect because there was none. Um, if anything, I had to be creative about how to deal with like the small business loans or whatever. But in terms of my artwork, it's actually been really good because the networking sounds so businessy. Connecting with and creating with other artists. So we would meet outside to in a big park to try to talk about making our lives. We'd reach out and support one another with in artist resources. I've begun a lot more, putting a lot more effort. I did before, but not as much effort in applying to residencies and shows. And so that's been good.
Right, so there was more time to actually apply for these because that takes a huge amount of effort, right?
Oh
Can you
yeah.
tell us more about the application process, even because
Oh,
it isn't all just
geez.
fun and
Uh,
games?
yeah, getting really comfortable with rejection. Getting really comfortable with rejection. I am so much better at rejections. Another thing that I've been able to do during uh, in the last couple of years is, along with connecting with my colleagues and my creative friends, is spending a lot of more time reading and listening about either first person or third person about artist process, art
Mm.
history, and that's been great because it's nothing quite like listening to I bought the audiobook a while back of Jerry Schultz, how to be an artist, and it's great because it's like having your favorite crotchety uncle kick you in the ass about get up and do your damn work, as he would say, you big baby. But yeah, listening to these amazing art history characters that whom I admire, and of course, we only know the history from that glorified ways in which their history may be talked about, but to explore their struggles and their process and their life and their drama uh, has been encouraging.
And would you consider yourself a tortured artist? Many of the artists I'm aware of, I studied art history at school, had to have some of a, they say, even songwriters say their creative process comes often out of a very dark time.
I think that's bullshit.
Okay, tell me more
There,
about that
there
then.
are people who are tortured and struggle with trauma or mental health. There are people who are artists. Those are overlapping Venn diagrams, but having trauma, emotional struggle, familial struggle does not is not necessary for having a creative life. I think that it's a mistake in causality and correlation. Is it possible that individuals who are more observant or self-reflective or more sensitive in different ways may also find it kind of difficult to get along in the world or difficult to navigate the world? But that doesn't mean that all of them are creative or are pursuing or self-identifying as artists. So I think it's a dramatic trope, and it's a way to romanticize artists while not paying them.
Oh, that sucks. We don't want to support that at
Right.
all.
So it's like the opera La Boheme. which then later on became Rent. And honestly, Rent as a musical is much better than La Boheme. Um, it's the lives of actual people in the margins and the fringe who are trying to survive. And when you put that on stage, it becomes exoticized for the patron class. And the happy artists, like say like Matisse, just doesn't get that kind of like, well, he was married and happy and made art, as opposed to Picasso,
Right.
drama, and who was had drama and made great art. So it's
So absinthe and ear biting are not a requirement to be an artist.
nah,
Good.
but absinthe can be fun.
I've only had it a few times and it hasn't had this big impact on me, I have to
Nah, the
say.
modern one I don't think does. I do need to take it with a lot of sugar though, because it's kind of like yeah.
So, many people know you through your sex education work, and I know some of my audience that may have been why they even showed up for today. So, like, when did you first start considering yourself an artist, and when did you begin to make that crossover? I know they're two sides of the same coin, but when did you start feeling like you could actually call yourself an artist?
Those are two different questions.
They are.
Willing to call myself an artist versus actually being an artist. Self-identifying versus action, right?
Right.
It's, I mean, it's similar to like sexuality. There's self-identifying as a gay man versus men who have sex with men.
Right.
So when was the behavior or when was the identification?
I'd like to know both.
So the identification, I suppose I struggled with because of being caught up in uh, the capitalistic notion of what gives capital A artist as a career value, and that this idea that one has to have a certain amount of technical competency and sales, really, that gallery representation, etc., that all of these accolades in order to call oneself an artist. And that's the professionalization of work creates creates these tight little gates, and we end up internally becoming our own gatekeepers. That not good enough, am I? And then this whole business about emerging artists, mid-career artists, established artists, and then there's like an age correlation with that, which is really annoying. It makes it uh, it makes it easier for the business of art sales, which is different than the career of art making.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in terms of when have I been behaviorally engaging in as an artist? Always.
But
Uh,
always like when you were in elementary school, you loved art class or,
yeah.
oh, great. Even I didn't know that about you,
Yeah.
Midori.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was always drawing, uh, and and hmm, some of you will recognize this, making art things out of discarded things. And sometimes it was like making a little doll out of a pen cap.
Well, that's how one starts, right?
Yeah.
Experimenting and playing.
Yeah, and my mother was an academic of uh, Edo period Japanese children's literature and uh, 18th and 19th century German children's literature. Not specific at all, really specific. When I was a little kid, adults do strange things of training children to be. My mom uh, trained me to recognize certain artists, and she had a vast collection of prints, right? Original prints and art. And she had me trained in terms of recognizing a handful of particular artists. So I could just like look at it and go, oh, that's so and so, and then walk off. And here's like this 6-year-old kid. I remember this one time when I came home from school, and I walked in, and my mother was with some of her art colleagues, and she had some prints on the table and called me over. Your child is a trained monkey routine, I think, and said, hey, Midori, who's this artist? And I said, oh, that's Yumeji. Can I go now? And then all the adults looked, it's kind of like, well, is that Batman or Superman? I mean, to me, it was at that level. Well, duh, it's Batman. Can I go now?
Right.
So, yeah. Um, Actually, it's funny. I'm working on an art talk. I actually have giant notes here. I'm working on an artist talk that I'm actually giving tomorrow at the Battery Club. And the Battery Club is a essentially an urban country club, right, for San Francisco folks. And I'm giving a talk on my piece that I put up an exhibition recently, Tectonic. And it starts off actually with the childhood sense memory. So, Caroline, what is like your earliest sense memory that you can recall?
Being in a crib at night, and there was a balloon in the room.
Oh, neat. Nice.
That's what I remember.
Um, I'm not sure if it's my earliest memory. However, one that's strong for me is being in also a crib, but I was in a traditional Japanese uh, baby basket. It's a round basket woven in the same material as tatami mats and lined in cloth and some sort of a, I suppose, cotton batting or something like that. And this is also the era when everyone in Japan, I'm born and raised in Japan, uh, was going for plastic and vinyl because that was the modern way. And there's my mother um, raising me in with a lot more traditional toys, etc. Right. So I remember being in this basket, and of course, childhood memories are fuzzy. So do I remember it, or have I told myself that I remember it? Anyhow, the smell of the tatami mat, which is kind of like dried sweetgrass, and the smell of the tatami, like weaving the woven basket, there's the texture of the weaving. And I absolutely loved the texture, the materiality, the smell, the repetition of the patterns, and running hand over it, there's a rhythmicness to the pattern, right? That smell. But it's a traditional, humble thing. It's not fancy high Japanese art. So from early on, and I'm sure with my mother's influence, because all the other parents were giving plastic toys. Even when I wanted plastic toys, I got wood and straw toys. Occasionally, I would get the plastic like Barbie table or whatever, right? But I would get more traditional toys, which I love the texture of. And I've had an early fondness for survival folk craft in traditional Japanese everyday, as well as farmers had to be able to weave their own sandals. To the raincoats in a farmer's raincoat is made out of straws that are woven together. Common craft. And these are ephemeral objects of seriously marginalized people, farmers, of kimonos that are repaired so often. It's like American quilting. How did quilting start? Survival, necessity. So kimonos that are patched, or there's a certain oversewing pattern to make kimonos last longer. And I don't mean the fancy ass kimono. I'm talking go out in the rice field and work kimono. Um, so folk craft, survival craft. I've been fascinated with things like that, and textile and fiber, the texture of it. So that's a childhood memory, a sense memory. And then another childhood memory I have is the backyard of the tenement building that I grew up in a working class tenement building. There was a tiny little plot of dirt, really just a plot of dirt. And I remember digging with I suppose, a hand shovel. And I was digging a hole and I was going to dig so until I got to America. I hear that kids over here have the thing about digging a hole to China. I was told that once I came over here, which I find entertaining. Um, yeah, so I was trying to dig. And this, these two little incidents actually connect to the particular materials I work with and technology or skills or modality that I work with. A lot of the material that I work with, the medium, is salvaged material, often organic material, things that would be cast off and considered to be trash or refuse. In my current exhibition, Tectonic, I have 7 large discs, and I'll show this in a moment. 7 large discs, I'm talking 6.5 feet in diameter.
Wow, really big.
Yes, 6.5 feet in diameter, somewhere between 5 to 6.5 feet. 7 of them, and the frames themselves, the hexagon, are made of reclaimed wood from architectural salvage. And I weave in it with rope that were, well, it did not measure up to the industrial standards. These were, I bought off of Twisted Monk rope that was unsuitable.
Ah,
So we have materials, industrial material that has its roots in folk craft and survival rope that then did not meet industrial and production uh, standard, standard of commerce. And I salvaged that. Now, Twisted Monk kept it instead of putting it into landfill, figuring there'll be something to do with it. And lo and behold, a few years later, I call him up and say, "Hey, would you happen to?" And he had a corner of a warehouse stacked with all these like spools. So I bought a about the size that could fill a back of a large SUV. I mean, everything but the driver's
wow.
seat amount of rope. And yeah, to use that which is discarded, use that which is considered not worthy, and to give it a new life, to give it
Mm.
form and function and something beyond what it was originally intended for, and that which otherwise would have been cast aside. And there's a great saying that I need to look up the actual origins of it, but I was talking with Laura Antonou and about how uh, the the rejected stone, and I want to find the biblical reference to this, and this is apparently from her synagogue. The rejected stone, the unworthy is the becomes the cornerstone and the strength.
Mm. I have heard that before. I'm a
Yeah,
little rusty on my biblical references, but
and think of the queers, and think of women, and think of
yes.
marginalized people, and then think about who's the global majority.
Right.
Right. So taking salvage material and then the echoes of the folk craft, right? Now, so let's see, looking back at my notes here. So there's the materiality of it, and I'll show you in a moment the tectonics. But part of the inspiration, I won this art award to create a site specific sculpture, and it had some requirements. It was up in the air, right? So I went to a store, I looked up, I thought about it. I interviewed the proprietor who was putting up this award, and turns out our values are very similar. Um, Iranian immigrant and a queer, genderqueer individual. So part of my inspiration in this is maps. I love maps, but I'm also disturbed by maps. How we choose to represent that which we are on. And how do I represent this marble that we live on that goes beyond the geopolitical lines, which, as we see today and has always been, volatile and constantly changing. And just think about in our own lifetime, that which we assume to be permanent and unchanging, and how quickly it changes. So, what's older than that? Is that your cat or my cat?
That is my kitten. She is desperate to get in on the action. No, it's mine. She's
Okay.
got her in the other room.
I thought one of my cats was locked in a closet.
No, I'm sorry you can hear that. She might. I could let her make a cameo, but
Yeah, yeah,
I was
go ahead.
trying to.
It's
Yeah,
not
she's
a
not used to being put under restriction. Anyway,
fine. It's a Zoom call. It's got to have cats. Um, yeah. So what was I saying in terms of what was I?
you were talking about maps and
Oh,
how
right, right.
you're incorporating that into your art, and
Yeah,
how
and
how geopolitically maps get redrawn and can be volatile all the time.
also the perspective of where is the center of the map? Why is north always
Yes,
up, south down? Why is it that the center of the map is particularly this country or that? And the maps that are drawn from different uh, uh, publishing centers or point of focus will change. And I discovered that the emojis, if you put up Earth in emoji, you get 3 different viewing options.
that's great. I
Yeah, I
didn't
mean,
know that.
try it right now. You'll see 3 different viewing options, which is new. Um, so why do we assume the world is as it is shown in a map? And a map is a representation that we've created. So what is older than the geopolitical line? How do I express this earth that we stand upon? Tectonic plates. And I am from Japan and now living in San Francisco. My entire life has been on the edge of the ring of fire. I can literally go hiking. There's a road up in Marin or Humboldt where I go hiking, where one side of the road is the North American plate. I cross the road and it's the Pacific plate, and I can see the fissure.
Oh,
Uh,
that's amazing.
yeah, the fault line is the road. So that which is greater than us, and looking at our planet through a very, very long time view is a tectonic plates, which are also not unchanging. It is moving, it
Absolutely.
is clashing, it's floating, and it's essentially floating on the surface of this molten, highly volatile, at a cosmic scale, volatile sphere. So I created took the 7 major tectonic plates and wove them into these 6.5 foot wide hexagons. And in the process of weaving that, I actually wove it on the backyard, on the back deck, several hours through rain, where it was raining on me, and I'm wearing rain gear, and the rope is getting swollen. from the moisture, but I've got a deadline to make. My
Ah,
fingers are cold. Once I actually I was cold. I had heaters, I had layers, but I'm not moving. It's not like hiking where I'm generating enough heat.
yes.
So I had little hand warmers in my on my torso, and at the 4 in the morning, I would often actually see the sunrise. There were several days where I worked like 12 to one day I worked 17 hours. Um, so at the end of one of those days, I took my clothes off, and the hand warmer was stuck to my skin, and I'd gotten a what is it, a second, third degree burn?
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, I'm like, oops. But I was so focused on this, I didn't notice it. But yeah, it's the process of making it and then getting into the repetitive pattern of this um, was put me in a really good zone, challenging zone. And then I also got to thinking about the nature of maps and representation. And the map, and I have this idea that maps, especially the geopolitical global maps, right, are geopolitical selfies of a people. Maps
Right.
are selfies.
That's a fascinating way to look at it.
And like selfies, trying to trying to put best face forward or create an impression or present oneself in a way that we want to be perceived or we perceive ourselves. That if we don't like it, we delete, we alter things. Um, and the map as selfies for a peoples. And I say for a people because, say, uh, if you ask an American what a map looks like, world map looks like, as opposed to ask a uh, Ukrainian what a map looks like, as opposed to ask a South African as to what a map looks like, and that which is put in, that which is omitted. My biggest plate is the Pacific plate. And part of the salvage material is it's also made with recycled plastic strings made out of recycled plastic bottles, which I asked for I asked of volunteers and friends and patrons to contribute by making it. And I sent this tool for making string. And that way I could invite people to help make these when I could not be with people to make them. So I took these plastic strings, and you'll see it in a moment. I used it for the Pacific plate. Now, before I show the Pacific plate, keep in mind that the Pacific plate is the largest plate, and yet with the least surface soil. It's just white. The Pacific plate, from a Western perspective, is often presented as empty, but it's anything but empty. Underneath it is an entire world that might as well be another planet full of aliens.
Mm.
Um, Also, there's the giant trash gyre that floats around in the middle of the Pacific.
Oh, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
Yep, that, yep. And another bit is that the Polynesians developed their own ways of making a map. The, the Polynesian stick map, which used sticks and shells to create this representation of tidal flow. So the Polynesian map is made of things that move. European based maps are things that are perceived to never move.
Mm. And often so called European maps are created or the lines are drawn by oppressive colonizers, right? As well.
Or, yes, liberators, as sometimes they call themselves. Russia!
Yeah, but the British too. And
Yeah. And
yeah.
hey, the Japanese too.
Uh,
In North America, there's a tendency to look at all of Asian peoples as a monolith of, oh, poor people of color, minority, oppressed. Okay, except let's look at Asian history. I mean, you
Mm.
essentially get early 20th century, late 19th century and early 20th century Japan is like Nazi Germany.
Ah, I didn't know.
The the invasions, the multiple invasions made onto the continent, the brutality, yeah, the brutality of it, all the way down to biological experimentation.
Wow, that's scary.
So who's the victor, right? And the map of Korea as drawn by the occupying Japanese force versus the various Korean dynasty. And is it the Han people or is it the Mongols? Is it,
Yeah.
yeah, there's so much going on, right? So let me, if I may screen share.
Yeah, please.
Okay, let's go to, okay, here's Planet Midori. Do you see Planet Midori? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So planetmidori.com gets you to the sexologist educator, and let us click onto the artist side. This is going to be redesigned. That's one of my sculptures called the dining room. Yes, look closely onto the carpet. See that shag carpet? Not shag carpet.
Oh. So I'm learning more about your desire to be collaborative because isn't this when you invited people to come and smash things with
It's this
you?
event called a shatter party, where I
That's right.
invite people to break plates. And then I take the broken plates and construct a dining room. From a distance, it looks like a regular dining room.
Wow.
But I'm sure everyone will read in what what this sculpture is about.
Really interesting that I heard recently that actually breaking glass, I know this is ceramic, but I imagine it has a similar um, experience for the person smashing things, is really cathartic. Like it's a really good way to do your anger work. So, isn't that interesting as the foundation under which the family sits down to their meal at the table?
Yeah. Um, with this sculpture that's in front of you. Now, you haven't had a chance to come to one of my shatter parties.
No, I haven't.
I want to do it. I just put in a proposal with a local residency to do this, and I was rejected again,
Oh,
again. Anyhow, what comes up for you looking at this?
um, this may be my projection, but
It's all our projections.
okay. I
Everything
was
is
like, it
perspective.
I mean, it reminds me of the family dining room table that we would sit around. We always had this. We sat 3 meals a day. We would, aside from when we were at school, but we would sit down to a supposedly very well mannered dinner. But there was like so much tension in the household. So all these shattered dishes underneath, for me, are reflecting what's really going on underneath the dining room table that had perfect manners and my stepfather was from Oxford, so this veneer of everything being perfect, like the four plates, there's a place for each person at the table, but everything is shattered and broken underneath. For me, that's a great representation of my childhood
Mm,
because it was very imperfect.
mm.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious in the room as to what others see or feel in this particular piece. And if you write it into the chat box, that'll be great. So for those of you who are joining us now, so this is the dining room, but let's go to this. Oh, I think I actually have this one.
Mm.
This up? No, let's go here. Okay, so this is, here's my artist resume and bio, and these are the 7 plates of the tectonics that you see along the top there. Keep in mind, they are 6 feet across. And I have them hanging from the ceiling and literally disoriented, taken apart and disoriented without without giving it any of them any predominance or primacy. They are above us, so the land which we are standing on, which we actually cannot see, but we look up to see that which we are standing upon. And and our instinct is to place ourselves and our own history upon maps. So to look up, and this, as you walk in to this exhibition, this beautiful, beautiful plant store and a wine bar and an exhibition space, and you eventually have to look up. So you've got this little booklet, but you have to look up. The scent of there's the scent of the hemp rope. There is this texture above which just far enough that you cannot touch. And then there's the physical discomfort and literal disorientation in order to see the artwork.
Ah,
And
because you have to crane your neck to even
yep,
look up.
yep. And here's some
Wow.
close up of the work. That's the, yeah. And that's me making, it was cold, really cold. And this is also a visual of close up of me making the Pacific plate. Let's go up
Mm.
here. I am going to be putting more of these pictures up. Also, y'all, these are for sale. Please buy them. um,
And Midori, is it for sale as like each individual plate, or is it for sale as the whole piece?
yes, to both. I
Yes, to
would
both.
prefer it stayed together. However, it's also available individually. Let's see. I need to put a picture of the Pacific plate up. That is much better. Oh, if we go to, you see here or in right there, I will put up a better image of it. That's the Pacific plate, and it has an interesting effect of the plastic refracts the light. It kind of looks like glass.
Mm.
And oh, I need to put a larger image of this up. Let me unshare, and I will put that up. Yeah. Let's see. Let me take a look here.
Well, while you're looking, Midori, I'm fascinated with this crossover that you're using. And I know you don't always use rope, but I know in a number of pieces, especially in the pandemic, you have used rope. And I'm fascinated how there's this crossover between your sex education work and the uh, the art for being your creative outlet work.
Actually, I think my first major spatial installation using rope was 2005.
Well, it's part of why I wanted to do this because I feel like so many people know you as, and in my opinion, the world's leading expert on rope. And again, in my opinion, but I think you're one of the best kink educators out there. And yet there's this other whole aspect to you that people need to know about. And I'm loving that you're being willing to share so many personal stories, like the story about being in, I want to call it a bassinet. It probably
Yeah,
wasn't a
it is. It
bassinet,
is a
but
bassinet.
it feels like a Japanese
Oh yeah,
bassinet,
yeah.
and how you played with the texture. And then I can feel into how you're talking about I'm forgetting the name, hand mitten, hand glove, finger mitten. What is this thing that got attached to your skin?
Oh, the hand warmer. Yeah,
Hand warmer.
yeah.
Thank you. Like I'm watching the fusion and the textures of all of those come to play. I find
Yeah.
that quite fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting that there are two different populations, three different populations I deal with. The kink subculture folks have their own assumptions about my work. The art folks have their own assumptions, and then my colleagues and other artists who probably have the most accurate, if you will. Um, I will I will confess to a frustration that in the kink subculture, uh, I will, like I was talking about this with another artist who does portraiture that overlap into erotic self-expressions. But in the kink subcultures, I will too frequently have people saying, "Oh, I see you're doing bondage art," or "I see that your sculpture is an extension of your rope bondage." I'm like, no, not even. And it's having it backwards. Um, I have an interest in textile and weaving, and that which wrapping, very Japanese thing, right? And the interest in folk craft. And then when it came, I'm already working with fiber and playing with it, but again, also not self identifying as an artist because that's what fancy people who went to art school get to call themselves. Turns out I'm an artist. Um, uh, so when I started playing with kink as well, and I couldn't afford the fancy ass leather stuff, but I'd look at it and go, "Ew, I'm crafty and Japanese. I could reverse engineer this with the things I can afford." Rope. And so people get it backwards, right?
Ah,
Um, and my using rope as one of my medium, it's just a medium. I mean, you don't look at Picasso and say he's a canvas artist. He's an artist.
right.
Um, but it is interesting that because of my other work that covers sexuality, but not limited to, right? That because it's titillating, because somehow it's exciting and exotic, people want that to be all of me. Now, if somebody's like a dentist and they also are a sculptor, they don't ask them if they do dental art. I'm sure there's somebody out there. I have actually made sculpture out of teeth, but I'm not a dentist. I mean, if they see my sculpture of teeth, they don't ask me if I'm a dentist.
Right.
So, yeah, it's interesting that in the subculture, there's this insistence upon somehow me representing a subculture or I will notice this thing of uh, almost like a betrayal, like that if
Hmm.
I'm doing artwork with whole various different meanings, and if it's not about rope bondage, that, oh, how dare you, and that's not how to represent the community. I'm not representing any community. I'm me. I'm representing my own personal experience. um, at this point, I also wonder if it isn't a general okay, on the art side, right, on the art side population, you get folks that are then uncomfortable. And you would think contemporary art would be fine with and celebrate exploration of queerness or sexuality, but no, actually the contemporary art industry, unless you're like super famous, really uptight. And if you're Francis Bacon, sure, you can show like um, that guy is a tortured guy who's an artist who's like an internalized homophobia and an ex-callboy making amazing famous artwork that hangs in the Tate. But he gets to show like distorted monster penises. And it's called, it is art. But if somebody else, like say Ron Athey, shows body modification and performance art, oh, freak junkie doing disgusting things with their body.
Hmm.
Have you seen Francis Bacon's artwork? I do not want to be alone in that in a room. I love visiting it, like many of my freaky ass friends, I don't want to live with it.
Right.
Because yeah, look up Francis Bacon, not the old guy, the 20th century guy, and check out the artwork because that is that brain is freaky. Um, but yeah, so art folks will get uncomfortable that my other job, my career is around teaching sexuality and self-expression. The same people who were like, oh, liberal politics, and I'm like, no, can't, you can't handle Ron Athey. So look up Ron Athey, amazing artist, um, and just honored to be friend with. But yeah, and then there's the third group of people who are my artist colleagues who understand that there's a madness to drive to create, and there's also a need to pay my bills, and that I'm lucky enough to pay my bills with something that I'm really interested in, and the hustle and the struggle. So, yeah, um, and I make other work as well. I've made sculptures out of teeth. I have uh, here's one of my paintings in the background. I've done performances. Uh, yeah, and if you go to my art site, you will see much of my work. So let's see. Let me.
So, Midori, if
Uh,
people want to, it's great to be able to look things up online. And I know Mr. Greg will drop the link in a second. But where can people go and see Tectonic?
oh yeah. So Tectonic is in San Francisco, and it will be up for the next 10 month, I suppose. 10 month, I think. It is in San Francisco's Mission District on Mission Street between 21st and 22nd, on the same block as Alamo for those of us San Franciscans. And there is a parking garage on 21st Street. Go park there. Parking's a bitch in the Mission. It is a beautiful wine bar. And yeah, I would love it if you all go see it and contemplate upon the long view and the impermanence and the geopolitical subjectivity of how we represent our people selfie.
Mhm.
Now, we have not looked at I have not looked at the questions.
Well, we're going to start taking, people have mostly been commenting. I've been tracking Midori, but we're going to start taking, thank you for all those links, Mr. Greg. We're going to start taking questions shortly from our patrons. But before we go there, we've spoken a lot about your physical art, but you also do performance art. And I'd love you to speak to that because I'm just remembering the word suffering in the piece. We talked about it a little bit before you and I came
Okay.
on, but that you've done with Kumi. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
My performance art, many of my characters, let me see if I can pull up a page on that. Uh, I have characters that I've been working with and embodying for many years. Let's see. This is my stripped down site right now. So let me go here and let's explore performances. My most recent performance actually is, there it is. There it is. Okay. And this one is called Interface. During COVID, since most of my performance pieces are in some way or another interactive, where I break down the barrier between viewer, audience, and viewer versus artist, where the viewers become participants, and in many ways, the artists themselves. Many of my characters, including Yamamba, which is a Japanese crone, La Pagliaccia Bianca, the clown, also the clown fortune teller. Then there's the ancient one. Um, Interestingly, I noticed one day they are all mute. all of the characters are entirely physical in their performance and they do not speak. So much so that one of the characters actually has a full mask where the mouth is represented as X'd out.
Mm.
Um, I speak for a living. On my teaching side, I speak, but there are things that I cannot express with words adequately. So, for example, the dining room, that's full of things that words cannot capture. Um, this interface with the background of sunrise, literally sunrise in San Francisco Bay, with the background of it. I collaborated with 204 viewers over a period of 5 minutes, whereupon I became the medium and they the artist. The dissolving of the self, as well as stepping into other archetypal characters. They are almost like other beings. Oh yeah, and then there's the god of no name. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I haven't been able to perform in that body for a long time. But yeah, it's they're mute. What else we got here? Oh, this is another performance, COVID performance. It's a 6 hour durational performance where I washed my hand continuously. It's the early days of COVID, right? And I would wash my hand. I had NPR, the local KQED playing, which is pretty much all talk. Anytime anything on the pandemic or COVID was mentioned, I would start washing my hand for 6 hours. I wash my hand a
Wow.
lot.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So that's a durational performance. Let's go to some of the, oh, that's in the Pines installation. It's funny to look back. This one, um, this one captured in a moment is what do I call it? The Who's My Neighbor, which is a reference to the Good Samaritan. So this character is crawls out of a hole and your lines attached to her and that gets tossed out to the audience. And the audience starts pulling me around, initially tentatively, but then as I can rely on group psychology, it starts getting violent. I'm getting pulled and
Mm.
pulled and pulled. And what was interesting was then somebody from the audience shouted, and this was not a plant because I didn't know what would happen. A lot of my performances, I don't know what's going to happen. Um, Somebody shouted, "Let her go."
And what did the audience do with that?
Well, at that point, there was hesitation, and I actually had a stagehand that, because I have a time limit, was like,
Right.
yeah, we had like a 5 minute or 4 minute time limit, but it was amazing how quickly the violence escalated. I mean, I essentially put myself in a Milgram experiment.
In a what experiment? I couldn't.
Milgram,
I don't know. I'm not familiar with that reference.
let's see, there's Milgram and Zimbardo, and they were actually colleagues. One of them did the fake zap the fake patient and follow the authorities ruled, and the other one is the prisoners and the guards and exploring the potential for human violence.
Okay, I knew the first one, but
Yeah.
I don't know the second experiment.
So I put myself in a Milgram study and see how quickly people would engage in deteriorating into violence. And who is my neighbor? Who is the Good Samaritan? So, yeah, these are some of my performances.
Thank you. I find it quite fascinating. I know you've done I believe it was at Soma, you did a piece with flowers, with cut flowers. And so I love how you're using these raw ingredients, be it rope, or be it flowers, or be it playing. You referenced there's a performance piece that you do with Kumi Invocation, I believe, with the where you're wearing a mask and you said your mouth is crossed out. I hadn't even got this reference that there was no speaking.
Yeah, no, none
You
of
let
that.
the art speak for itself.
Yeah, and oftentimes they're expressing something in myself that I don't have words for. I mean, hell, if I had words for it, I'd be in writing songs or poetry or something. Um, Interestingly, when I was a little kid, when some people would ask me, little kid, right? What do you want to do when you grow up? And I don't know why. It might have been the hat. I said poet. It might have been the beret. I thought poets wore berets, and in my mother's circle and all that, they were all a bunch of like uh, art. I guess some were artists. A lot of them were like in academia. But, something about that left bank of Paris, and I didn't even really know what that was, but it just seemed glamorous. Never mind the part about being poor and living in
Mm.
unheated apartments and the hustles that people did to pursue the life of art. But yeah, a lot of my characters are most of my characters are mute.
Fascinating. Well, I've been getting the privilege, and I still have more questions for you, but I want to make sure that we're giving space to our patrons to ask. So I think I want to be civilized, Midori. You're much better at just letting go of control and surrendering to people manhandling you in performance pieces. But I'd love it if people raise their hands.
Yeah,
And then I'm
yeah,
happy to call on you just so that it's not a cacophony of sound. So if you have a question, feel free to do that. Um,
no,
Great, Mr. Greg. I'm going to call on you first. Feel free to unmute.
Hi, thanks so much. I have a question about the tectonic plates, and you'd mentioned that you had some inspiration before that regarding maps and discarded rope and other things. And then when you applied, you presented a specific form for it. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about what was already pre-planned in your head and what uh, came about when you actually tried to create it and how maybe it changed that process. And if I can
yeah.
add a part two, would be what would you do with it next if you
Oh,
had an
nice.
opportunity to do
Okay,
it?
so some things did change out of material limitations, right? Um, I had no idea how expensive it would be to hang it. Oh my God. The actual artwork itself, very low budget, but the hardware, because I'm using industrial and architectural grade hardware and custom made hooks to hook over the beams without damaging it. Uh, I spent like and renting the scissor lift, and I spent about $2,300 just
Mm.
on material costs, not including paying the people who helped me. So uh, let's see. So what changed and what was it? What remained the same and what changed? Was that it?
Yeah, what was maybe pre-planned before you even went to Arcana?
Yeah, pre-planned was hanging things. Pre-planned was discarded material and reclaiming material. Pre-planned was also at different levels, the discs, the plates. Um, Pre-planned was representation of the the ground, the earth part. Things that changed. Well, I wanted to have plastic flowers uh, made out of recycled plastic bottles. And I could not get the damn petals to stick. And I tried all sorts of different material and adhesives, and I could not get it to stick. It drove me nuts. I tried a lot of different things and could not get it to stick. Um, oh boy. So that I had to ixnay. Uh, the Pacific plate, I had not originally planned on doing it as the three sets of lines. My first iteration of the Pacific plate was I was going to use rope to have Hawaiian Islands, but then it looked too connected, and I needed Hawaii to be floating in that seeming nothingness. So I did one iteration, undid the whole thing, and then started stringing this like stringing a harp. And then it snapped, and I had to restring it, and I had to figure out what tension to have it. Each directionality is one continuous plastic.
Oh.
So yeah. Um, so and what else changed? I thought I would represent bodies of water and rivers using the plastic lines in each uh, plate. I didn't like how it looked. I tried it and I undid it. I didn't like how it looked. It looked a little too literal and too much of maps, right? That already exists. And when I'm trying to deconstruct maps, I didn't need to do that. Did that answer it?
Yeah, I think so. I did have a part B on that one, which
Yeah.
if I threw a bunch of money at you and told you, okay, do the same thing again, only, new and interesting, kind of expand on the same theme. Any thoughts on what you might do?
Bigger, bigger, much bigger. Right now, I'm the largest is 6.5 feet in diameter, but I want bigger.
What does bigger do for the piece? Why? And I'm somebody who hasn't seen it in person because I'm not in California anymore.
One, just because I really like working at a big scale and I don't often get to, but I think there's that sense of overwhelm to, and it shifts the perspective, right? It shifts the perspective. There's an overwhelm. Uh, so there's that. I also have an idea of what if I did that and then cast it in bronze?
Mm.
And as how I understand bronze, is I need to find the casting company and the foundry. I myself don't have to do it because Rodin didn't cast his own thing. And Ai Weiwei doesn't actually make all the things. He doesn't make anything. He comes up with ideas and then hires a bunch of people, and pays them a living wage. Amen. So yeah, that's what I would want to do with this. I am actually going to take the bronzing idea and submit it to a public land installation. And, it's a Hail Mary. I'm sure I'll get rejected and I'll put it in anyway.
So, Midori, you've talked a lot about getting good at rejection, and I'm curious for every proposal that gets accepted, what's the ratio acceptance to number of proposals submitted?
I don't know because I think if I did that, I'd cry.
Okay. So it's better not to know.
Yeah, I don't know. I am, however, excited that this tectonic is going to be up for like a year because that's not something that happens in a gallery. And
Oh,
it
that's
might get,
fantastic.
yeah, and it'll get seen by and perhaps trigger more thought and discussion in a way that it might not. My hope is that it doesn't get like just blended in as, oh, weird macrame, you know. Yeah. And I see some, I just gasped at what? Which part?
Bronze. The bronze just seems insane.
That'd be great, right?
Midori seems to quite like the insane, the out the box, the how can I provoke. I feel like provocation is part of your art, Midori. I mean, that's
Yeah, but provocation that's not like hostile or mean. It's like
yes.
disorienting assumptions.
Oh, I love that. Thank you.
Deconstructing assumption. It's not provocation for the sake of hostility or confrontation, but rather is why is it so?
Oh, yes. Yeah, Midori, afterwards, there are quite a lot of people that
Oh,
gave their feedback about your piece, The Dining
okay.
Room.
Let me go back here. Uh, let's see. Where is that? There it is.
And
Arcana.
while Midori's looking, we've only got a few more minutes of her time, so if you have a question, this is not the time to be shy. So feel free to put up your hand and I'll call on.
Something that you can't see on that particular image I showed of the dining room. The 4 plates actually have been previously broken and attempted to be glued back together. So each of those 4 plates have been glued using different adhesives, and some like just it was the nightmarish jigsaw puzzle because I would take a plate, wrap it in a towel, and either drop it or drop things on it and towel so it wouldn't shard. And then I would try to put it back together.
Mm.
So, yeah, let's see. It says, watch out what you have to walk through to be able to sit down. Oh, that's good. Yeah. And also noticing how, see, it's so interesting what people notice on this because it's very different person to person. And let's see, fading facade of perfection, perfect family, perfect children, and the children aren't going down the traditional lawyer doctor path. Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, project away. Um, regarding dining room, getting a strong association with the common prefab chairs. Yep, still have those. Okay, recognize the chairs on the table. Good. Okay. Um, reflecting our changing taste, desires, place in life, the specific we've tried to sweep under the rug. Yeah, okay. Good, good. And so do you send the sculpture to a dentist for cleaning then? So I used animal teeth and made a vulva. And yeah, it's part of my plastics series. And that showed in New York at a queer art showing. And let's see if I can pull it up here. Oh, there it is. I will show you. Uh, should I give content warning? Giant animal teeth vulva about to be shown. Content warning given. And yeah,
Oh, wow, I haven't seen this.
and the room over here is where it's hanging.
Got
And
it.
this was purchased by a psychoanalyst.
Oh, I'm not surprised at
Very
all.
proud to say that.
Wow.
Yeah. Let's see. Yep. Purchased by a psychoanalyst. Oh, that's Melina, me, and Kumi performing. That was good. And TED Talk. All right, let's get out of there.
So
Yeah.
Midori, there is a question that I know I'd certainly be interested in coming in from Luscious. So Luscious, will you unmute and just ask?
I was wondering if I could share my viewpoint of what I had witnessed of that demo you had stated at the beginning, because I watched it. I was there. Like, it was the one at Dark Odyssey Surrender, right? Like, I just feel like however way you described it wasn't, I mean, from a viewer standpoint, it wasn't accurate. Like, I was just
Ah,
like, I was amazed at the two of you, the energy, the spark. I was just like, what? And this is the first time you've done that? And Carolyn was like literally like barking at Midori. It was like, it was intense and visceral. And I mean, I have an art background too, like even before kink, right? So I thought like, and I was a new baby kinkster at the time. And so like, I was like, no, Midori's got to be an artist, but I didn't know that you were, you know what I mean? And it was just, the way it played out was just magical. It was so magical to watch you two and to see two strong women like battle it out. And I didn't know who was submissive. I didn't know who was dominant, but you two, the way you played was just so memorable and vivid in my mind, you know?
Thank you. I see you mentioned here about that as where did it go? let's see, like watching performance art. Okay. Um, I appreciate that, but I don't consider that performance art.
Oh yeah, yeah, I know.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. No, now after watching this, absolutely I know. It's just I'm also like someone who has an art background before they started kink, and me as a baby kinkster who knew nothing about you and had barely like maybe just had a couple of years of flogging under my belt, watching that was like a performance to me as like someone who didn't know you that well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Luscious.
You're
So
very welcome.
we've got another question. Well, this will probably be our last question. How do you start integrating social practice in your art? This person says they are building cardboard structures and photographing them using various studio lights.
Mhm.
So how do you start integrating social practice?
Okay, social practice is a convenient giant umbrella to catch a whole lot of snooker people into doing things with you.
I
Is
don't know what social practice is, so can you define that for those of us that are
it's
clueless like me?
that's a good question, and it is a new enough practice as a term that um, a lot of people define it differently. It is engaging social action, engaging other people. There's an active aspect. Sometimes social practice is directly political. Sometimes it's not. It covers a wide range. So if for my friends who do, a friend who does silk screening and doing political posters with school age kids and teaching them how to make silk screen, that's social practice. But so is me inviting people to paint on my body. That's also social practice. It's a wide range. Like I said, it's tricking people into actually being creative in a way that they don't think they are. It's a bit of, oh look, I'm painting a fence. It's so fun. Come to paint the fence with me.
Okay, so how would you start integrating that into how would you suggest to a fellow artist on how
Well,
they would incorporate that?
what? Okay, I'm just talking out of my sleeve or out of my ass, whatever, right now. Um, Yes, it basically does come down to don't be shy and ask other people. Like, what kind of change and or action do you want to happen? What do you want other people to do with you? As a social practice artist, in a sense, you are not the sole artist. You're sharing the action with other people who don't know that they're artists. And they may not even have to identify as artists, like, like the tweeners who are making political posters and all that. Or uh, I've done things where I've taken old porn and sat down and started making origami crane and invited people to make them with me. Pornogami. Oh, I've done like guerrilla versions of social practice in museums. I believe it was the Art Institute of Chicago, where they had a Felix Gonzalez Torres exhibition. And amazing artist, please look him up. And he had a pile of paper, beautiful pile of paper. And there's an instruction there. Oh, yeah, Felix Gonzalez Torres, amazing. Pile of paper, and there's a little tiny instruction that says you're welcome to take the paper, because the volume of the mass of paper represents and stands for the loss of and the fading of life. He works a lot around HIV and death, right? So, but people will walk by and look at it and reverently and not actually read the instruction, or if they do, they don't take it seriously, and reverently look at this pile. But the artist's intention is to interact, right? He's long dead, but so there I am in Chicago. I pull up a piece of paper and I sit down on the floor. Just sit down right in the stream of traffic. And it wasn't like lots of people because it was like a weekday afternoon. And I just sit down and start folding cranes in very methodical, ritualistic, exaggerated body motion. Not in the way that I normally would fold crane, which is like talk, 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 fold, fold, fold. No, this was very performative movement in folding and not looking at anything but the paper. People were literally tripping over me, like because they're not watching, and they trip over me, and I keep making. And then somebody else is watching and they go and pick up one and start making. And somebody else goes and picks up and starts making. And then by the time there were like a dozen or 15 people sitting and making, I look up, dust myself up, and walk out. And there's a security guard that's like been leaning on the wall, leaning in the doorway, watching. And she's got like this like grin on her face. And I walk out, and she like did something like that. And so there's all these people sitting down. And I went around looking at the museum, and then I came back, and then I found like fewer people, but I found a dad and a little boy making a little hat. And so I affected action. Was it political? Probably not. Did it get people to think, why not? Or actually maybe read the artist's intention and instruction. I mean, in this case, I was the one following the rules. And the other people were the ones not paying attention to the rules. Not rules, but the game. And yeah, and you don't expect somebody to be sitting down on the floor, except I actually read the instructions. He's dead, but I think I would like to do this artist honor. So yeah, that's one.
That's great, Midori. Well, you've been so generous with your time. We've already gone a little over time, so I didn't check with you if how comfortable you were with that. But it's been really fascinating learning about this aspect of you, even though I consider you a pretty close friend. I've learned so much today. I know about some of your pieces, but I've learned about so much more even in this today, and including some of what you've been doing in the pandemic.
Mhm.
So it's really amazing. I love it that people can go and see Tectonic in person, and there's plenty of time for them to do that. And Mr. Greg, could you drop in the link for Midori's art website? Because I don't think people are as familiar with that as, and I know I want to go and poke around in there a little
The
after our.
easiest thing though is just go to planetmidori.com, and then there's
Okay.
like the education side and the art side, and just click on the art side.
Great. So it makes it super easy to find. And it sounds like you're going to have a new website up pretty soon.
Hope so. Yeah.
Wow, an artist's work literally is never done. Well, I'm really grateful for all the people that have joined us today. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your contributions to, sharing how some of Midori's pieces have impacted you. I wasn't planning on talking about my childhood, and you got me to do it twice, Midori. You're quite clever in the way that you do that.
Social practice.
Right. Be careful what you say yes to with Midori, because she gets all sorts of information out of you. This has been an absolute joy. I'm not sure what SP means. Social practice. Ah, there we go. Thank you. Sorry. It's been a real joy, Midori, to get to to get to learn more deeply about this other aspect of you, and a really big part of who you are in the world and how you want to be seen. So not just as this kink artist or just as the rope guru, but really looking at another whole way you love to I'm getting delightfully distracted by the chat and the good word going on here, but really allowing us to see you more deeply. And I know you're doing an arts and crafts night as well with your patrons, aren't you?
I am. I think I'm taking a couple weeks break because and then I'm gonna look at my calendar again and then start that again. Now the arts and crafts night is not just for patrons, it's anyone really.
Oh, I beg your pardon. I thought it was
That's
just the
for anyone.
patrons thing.
it's nice if there were patrons, but it's also, it's a way that I am accountable to get my butt in the seat and get work done.
Well, I love how you're engaging that. You said you love collaborating, and that's a way you're collaborating and working on your art at the same time. I know you've been over to my home when I lived in Oakland, bringing some of you're like, I'll come over as long as I can bring stuff that I'm working on, which is just great. I love that so much. Before we wrap up, I wanted to mention I didn't just pick some cool scene in the background randomly off the internet. This is actually, I'm going to kind of duck so you can see it a little bit better. There's a lovely little gateway or gangway heading down to the beach. This is a beach I'm running a retreat at, literally called the Bay of Dreams, Bahia de los Sueños, May 14th to the 19th, here in Baja California Sur. It's going to be amazing. I only have 3 spots left. So I'm going to drop a link in here for, I don't want to take too much time, but for you guys to check that out. It's the first retreat that I'm leading since the world changed. So go and check it out, and you can feel free to ask me some questions. You can contact me in all the ways. Midori, I'm so grateful that you got to share with us these other parts of your passion that I feel the world needs to keep knowing more about. And while this certainly we could have spent 3 or 4 hours just talking with you, I know I've certainly learned a lot. I know you have deadlines and you have
I actually have
proposals
to
together.
take what we just talked about, a lot of what we talked about, and bring it down to 15 minutes.
Ah, interesting. Why would you want to make it shorter?
Because that's a time limit at the talk I'm giving.
Oh, I see. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, then we collaboratively allowed you to practice the long form. You know, I'm into the long form. Midori, whenever I ask Midori for help with something, she's like, Caroline, I need it shorter. This happened again just the other day. And Midori, I had sent you the short version. That was the short version. I had edited it so much. Anyway. Well, thank you. I'd love it if you leave some love for Midori in the comments just before we close. Perhaps something that you really appreciated or something you learnt from her today. I'm really grateful that we all got to hang out and do this, and Midori for making time in your busy hustling schedule to share with us a little bit more about your passions as you peel the curtain back so we can get to know the fullness of Midori a little more. Oh, look at that. Mr. Greg is saying it was great. Thank you. Oh, I love this. Midori, your creativity is gorgeous. Yes, we're going to pet the artist now, right? Stroke the artist.
All right.
Oh,
I'm going to get going.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for being here, and we look forward to our next opportunity to connect with you all. All right, beautiful beings.